Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the Robert's Rules of Order section. Robert's Rules of Order. Parliamentary procedure. C-SPAN. Just mentioning these names can make a leader's blood run cold. They can send officers scurrying into the dark corners, attempting to hide from the oppressive, overly burdensome tools that are actually there to try to make it simpler. We'll tremble no more. Come out of the shadows and out of the back room. I see them hiding back there. Forget your fear of points of order and amendments to the motion. Here today to give us a very brief briefing on Robert's Rules of Orders is our own immediate past District Director, Kyle Hall.
Let's see how much court I have. It was April, years ago. I was the chair of the board for a service organization, and I'd done this Robert's Rules of Order thing for several years, but there was a meeting in May that I was dreading. Because in May, our board would make our decision on scholarships that we're awarding to high school kids graduating in our geography. And whenever we had that meeting where we were making the decision about which kids got how much money, Dan showed up. Now, Dan was a member of our club. He was a gregarious, helpful, generally pleasant guy. Had been in the organization for years. Dan had this one issue, though, which was which kid should get money to go to college. And he felt very strongly about it, and he thought he knew more about it than anybody else in the club. And he thought he knew more about it than we had a rigorous open process that we followed to decide who was going to get how much money. And the board would make that decision, and every year Dan would show up and try to change the board's mind. And Dan went from friendly and gregarious to being a bully. And I had sat there as a board member and watched the board argue with him for an hour, trying to shut him down. And I'd seen this happen several years in a row, and I knew it was going to happen this year. And I was the chair of the board, and I was not looking forward to this. And I said, you know, we can sit there and we can argue with him. I said, maybe I can use this Robert's Rules of Order stuff, which I've learned. Maybe I can actually use it and make use of it. So we had our meeting. The board met, and Dan was sitting there. And the committee presented their recommendations on who should get what, and Dan stood up and said, well, he started saying, I don't think this person should get that, and this could. He said, wait a minute, Dan. Stop. He said, the chair recognizes Dan. Do you have a motion? Oh, okay. Yeah, I can organize it that way. I said, I think this person should get this much, and this person should get this, and this person, and then, I said, okay, we captured your motion. Is this what you're saying? Yes. Great. Is there a second? No hand went up. I said, Dan, thank you for your motion. It dies for lack of a second. Let's move on. And Dan kind of went, and left, dejected. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful thing. There was nobody getting in anyone's face. There was no arguing. There was no prolonged debate. There were no hurt feelings. Maybe Dan's feelings were a little hurt that no one seconded his opinion. But it was a beautiful thing. And that's when I discovered the real purpose of Robert's Rules of Order. Self-defense. Robert's Rules of Order is self-defense. It helps you to protect you, the chair, and the board from bullies and from people who want to manipulate the process. And it's worth learning just for that. The other reason it's worth learning, we may say, yeah, but we don't have that problem in our club. Well, if you're a Toastmaster and you're learning leadership skills and communication skills, someday you might be a member of a board outside your club, like I was in a service organization. Someday you might be a board, maybe in a professional environment. We practice these skills in our clubs so we can use them out in the real world and use them with skill. So let's talk about some of the fundamentals of Robert's Rules of Order. And I want to talk about the thing that the thing that I think most people find most frustrating. And when I was first trying to chair a group, it's the thing I found most confusing. So we're in a meeting, we're discussing an issue, and somebody goes, Mr. Chairman, I move that hamana. Oh, okay. Well, and it was okay. So we're going to discuss that motion. We're talking about it, and you must say, "Well, I don't like that motion. I think we should change it this way." You're trying to change the motion. I think that needs a second. Well, the guy who always seconds everything says, "I'll second it." Oh, okay. So now we have to discuss the change of the motion, and we're busy trying to do that. And say, "Well, I don't think that change is the right change. I think we should change this way." And the guy who always seconds it again. And I'm trying to keep this straight. It was driving me nuts. So I want to show you a simple visual technique for keeping this in order. We have a hypothetical motion in front of us, and that motion is Marcy. Would you stand here, Marcy? Marcy, hold it the first time. Marcy is the motion. She has been first and seconded. We can now discuss the relative merits of Marcy, the pros and the cons, what we like and don't like about Marcy. We're not going to do that right now. But we're in the middle of debate about Marcy when somebody stands up and says, I want to change Marcy. I want to change the motion. Oh, and of course, the guy who always seconds the motion to make the motion to amend the motion. And now we have an amendment to the motion, and that is Jeffrey Hartman. Jeffrey, would you stand right in front of Marcy? So Jeffrey is now the amendment to the motion, and we can discuss the relative merits of Jeffrey. What we like and do not like about Jeffrey. What color Jeffrey would look best in. We can discuss all of that. And somebody in their wisdom goes, well, I don't think that amendment is quite right. I think we need to amend the amendment. I motion that we move to amend the amendment. And somebody else seconds it. So now we have an amendment to the amendment, played by our erstwhile and we can discuss Mike and what we like and don't like about Mike.
And that might take too long.
Yeah, we don't have enough time for that today. But the point is, in the middle of this discussion, somebody's going to try to talk about Marcy. But you can't, because you can't see her. Because she's buried 2 layers deep. And somebody's going to try to talk about Jeff, but you can't. Because you can't see him, because he's buried behind Mike. There's a reason he was built that big.
For this moment in time.
Yes. Mike will be very fond of, anybody here into computers, Mike will be very fond of telling you, this is a cube. You can only talk about what's, it's a stack. A stack is a cube. You can only talk about what's on top. So we decide, we vote, we decide, hey, we like this amendment to the amendment. So we say, we vote, and we go yay, and Mike can go sit down. Change your sign. You did. Yes, it passed. So now Jeffrey is the new and improved amendment to the motion. We can now talk about Jeffrey. We still can't talk about Marcy. She's behind Jeffrey. We can't see her. We can only talk about what's on top. We can now consider the new relative merits of Jeffrey. Let's assume we vote yay and it passes. Jeffrey can leave. Your new site? We now have the new and improved Marcy, which we can now continue our discussion on, and we can finally vote. Does that make sense? Thank you, Marcy. That's a simple visual thing I use to keep in mind what's going on when we're in the middle of a group. And of course, when somebody makes a motion, you should write it down, capture exactly their wording, and then somebody amends the motion, you capture the change to the wording, and somebody makes an amendment to the amendment, you capture that change, and when you come back, when you've worked down the stack, and you get back to Marcy again, okay, we're going to continue our discussion. Here's the newly amended motion, and you review it again. So everyone's on the same page, and everyone's discussing the same thing. Now, let's talk. That motion and the amendments to the motion and whatnot, all of that is intended that we work on only one thing at a time. And it's one of the ways that parliamentary procedure, Robert's Rules of Order, helps you get stuff done. One of the other ways is debate. There's some rules for debate. And how to make debate, how to do debate with courtesy and with justice. So I have two debaters who are going to make a statement.
Mr. Chair, I completely disagree with the motion that is on the floor. It is irrelevant.
Irrelevant? You cream puff without the cream, you
Well, that just speaks to the motion that you're putting on the floor. It's not valid.
Anybody who's done any sort of research or reading.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Joanna and Michael. One of the first rules of debate is that all people stand up and address the chair. They don't address each other, and you address the chair with courtesy. Otherwise, you don't get called out again. But because they're not addressing each other, you tend to keep personality issues out of it. I was asked by a club officer, when I was a division director, I was asked by a club officer to come and chair a meeting because the club was going to discuss something. They were having a lot of emotional issues over it. It was a divisive issue. There was a lot of emotion. And the president didn't want to be trying to manage that process. She was a little too close to some of her club members on the issue itself. And also, she wanted them to have a neutral party that they could address. So, all people address the chair. Of course, the chair should recognize them. So, Joanna stood up and said, Mr. Chair, and typically you would say, okay, the chair recognizes Joanna, and then she would address her opinion to me. Now, we may not do that in our little club officers with 7 people. That's a little formal for a 7-member club, but it's worth it to keep in mind. Now, when we're doing debate, when there is actually debate on an issue, like in this club issue I was talking about, we had 20 people here who had diverse opinions. You try to go pro, con, pro, con, pro, con. I mean, you have a different motion that's been set forward. You try to ask, okay, who's pro? You can go. Let the person who made the motion go first, and then a con, and then a pro, and then a con. Go back and forth, and that way you don't get all the pros on one end and all the cons on the other end. That kind of thing. One of the important aspects of this of Robert's Rules of Order is the minority must be heard. Majority rules, but the minority must be heard. So mixing it pro, con, and by limiting time. So typically, most organizations will have a traditional time limit. We limit your debate comments to 2 minutes. So we limit your debate comments to 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And you can't go longer unless you ask for it and the group agrees. So the advantage of that is nobody gets to stand and pontificate for a while on how they feel. And of course, you don't have the ever popular filibuster, which, Now, Please don't compare what we're doing here to Congress. They have their own special twist on Robert's Rules of Order. So limiting time. One of the other comments is, so I was invited to go to this club as the presiding officer. One of the benefits to that club is, one, I was a neutral party, I mentioned that. But the other is, the president wanted to speak her mind and vote. Typically, whoever's the presiding officer in a meeting does not voice an opinion and does not vote. And that was one of the advantages of inviting an outside person to come and share the meeting. Now, I wanted to share a quote with you. This has been a problem with, let's say, unhospitable debates. It has been an issue for a long time. Thomas Jefferson, writing about parliamentary procedure and debates, wrote this: "No one is to disturb another in his speech by hissing, coughing, spitting, speaking, or whispering to another." Well, I haven't been in a meeting where we've had any spitting problems yet, so we're doing okay. Now, I want to mention one other aspect of the debate. I had a secretary for a board meeting call me up, and she was going nuts. She was like, "I can't keep track of it all." I said, "What are you doing?" Well, she was trying to play court stenographer. She was trying to capture what everyone was saying. Oh, the motion was this, and then Christine said this, and Judy said this, and Matt said this, and Ellen said this. No, that's not the purpose of minutes. The purpose of minutes is not to capture what everyone said. It's to capture what was done. And what was done was, this motion was made, it was seconded, it was discussed. Was it passed or not? That's what was done. So once I explained that, she went, "Oh." Okay. Rebecca? My plants need poking.
I thought you were looking over me. Point of order, Mr. Chairman, there are points you haven't yet discussed.
Thank you, Rebecca. So the point of Rebecca interrupting me is, there are certain things you can do to interrupt the flow of a discussion. And some of them are extremely significant. I'll talk about point of order in a second. The first one is point of information. You should know about this. Point of information. All it is I am requesting information. Doesn't necessarily bring the meeting to a stop. Well, for instance, suppose we as a board have a motion to spend money on something, and we're discussing what the relative merits of spending motion on something. Somebody might go, "Point of information, Mr. Chairman, how much money do we have in the bank?" That would be a relevant piece of information, right? So at which point we might stop debate, get the treasurer to give us a 30-second report about how much money we have in the bank, and then we can continue the debate. Now, the point of order. She interrupted me, and the point of order is, I think the chair's making a mistake. That's what the point of order is about. The point of order is you whacking me up the side of the head with the Robert's Rules of Order book because you think I'm not doing something right. And you can interrupt me, and you can interrupt the speaker, you can interrupt whatever's going on for that, because Robert's Rules of Order is supposed to help us be courteous and to get work done. And if I'm screwing up, you need to let me know. Suppose we're having a debate and I keep picking the pro people and I'm not picking the con people. Maybe we've limited our total debate time to 15 minutes and I keep picking the pro people. The con people might be thinking, "Hey, we're not going to get any time. You should whack me upside the head with a point of order." And if I don't, I have to stop and deal with your point of order immediately. And if I don't, you whack me with another point of order. The other one I want to mention is the call to question. So we've been debating an issue for a while, and somebody who's speaking pro or con sits down, and somebody goes, "I call the question." This happens a lot. I've been in a lot of board meetings. "I call the question." A lot of boards respond by, "Okay, well, that ends debate. Let's vote," and that's wrong. What the person saying "I call the question" is doing is that they're saying, "I would like to end debate." Well, maybe they would like to end debate, but that doesn't mean you guys are done debating. They would like to end debate, they need a second. I call the question, somebody has to second it, and then we vote. So we stop debating on Marcy, the motion, in order to debate on whether or not we are going to end debate. Now, as I said, in an officer group of 7, that's kind of silly. But if you get 20 people in a room who care deeply about a topic, understanding these rules could be really, really helpful and useful. This is self-defense. Let me talk very briefly about the fundamentals of Robert's Rules of Order. By the way, the handout I gave you, please take it home, store it. I read through it. It's not rocket science. It's not terribly interesting literature. I didn't write it. I got this from somebody else. But I did add a couple of things. I added the stuff in the red boxes on the second page. I encourage you to look through the chart and see if you can figure out the chart on pages, I think it's 3 and 4. But what I wanted to discuss with you very briefly is the fundamentals. Justice and courtesy for all. We talked a little about that. The minority must be heard, the majority rules. We're doing only one thing at a time. And the primary thing is the purpose is to facilitate action, not obstruct it. So we need to use these rules to help us get work done, not slow us down. I hope I've covered Robert's Rules of Order in a way that you find enjoyable. If we practice with these skills, if we learn them, it can assist us in being more effective leaders, both in our clubs, out in the community, out in our professional lives. And by practicing it in a small, informal environment like our clubs, or a district executive committee meeting, or maybe even a district council meeting, which is, that's not small, that's 60, 70, 80 people. By practicing it there, when it comes time to do it out in the real world, out in our communities, or the boardrooms of companies, or nonprofits, we are more ready to participate. So I hope you'll take this home. I hope you'll consider Robert's Rules of Order. I hope you practice it in your clubs. Mr. Toastmaster.